Hello. Just give me one moment to pop up my screen on my other device here. I'll be right with you. 2 seconds. Because my actual computer screen is too far away. And I can't see you guys. Actual computer screen is too far away. And we'll shut off the volume because nobody wants to hear me twice. Okay. We need to make sure that this thing is focused. Why are you not? It's focused in my camera, but it doesn't look like that on the screen. If you're here, can you tell me if it is clear on your end? I would love to know. Because on my screen just in front of me here, it is not clear, but yet on my phone it is. See if I can get some focus here. Please, please, please tell me. Don't quite know why. It's fuzzy on my... Oops. Oh, and it's fine there. Okay. Looks good. Hi, Nikki. So glad you could join me. Welcome, welcome. Tell me, where are you from? We'll get started in just a moment. Thanks, I appreciate the message. You have no idea. We're going to be using our cute little quarantine man from Sweet Sentiment today. And what I really want to talk to you about is how do you figure out where those go? And that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to show you how you too can... New Jersey. Oh, okay. I've been to New Jersey a couple times as a kid. I'm Canadian, by the way. Oh, it's cold. We're not too bad here today. We're at 0, so that would be what, 32 for you guys? So we're right on the cusp of cold. So what I wanted to teach you guys is you can do this too. This is so super easy to do. All right, so let's get started. Thanks for joining me. If you're on replay, I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section, either as we go or later, or just give me a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, so what I've done initially is I've printed out this digital image. This is our quarantine man. Very fitting for the last couple of years that we've been dealing with. So I am going to grab just another blank sheet of paper, because if I'm going to use my Copics on this paper, it's going to bleed through, because this is just copy paper. So lightweight paper. Don't use your good cardstock or anything for this, because it defeats the purpose. Okay, so our little quarantine man, I want to kind of show how you would look at it in the respect of where are my shadows if the sun is coming from a specific location. So a lot of times people generally think either the sun is coming in from the right or the left, and they kind of generally stick with that mentality when they're coloring, and they don't shift their light source. So I wanted to go through that process with you and how you can do that with your own images. So you can use any image to do this. So just take that image, stamp it out multiple times on just lightweight paper, and this is what we're going to do. So first of all, you need to decide where your sun or your light source is coming from. So let's start off with this direction. So the sun is 2 this guy's is on his left shoulder, so it's coming in from the right. So the next thing you do is you're going to map wherever your shadows are on this particular image. And this is a great way to practice. So if the sun was coming from this direction, I was going to grab a toilet paper roll and show you this. God. So the shadow, the darkest shadow, is going to fall down this side of the toilet paper stack, right? Because that sun or that light source is going to create a shadow on the farthest away aspect of those rolls. Okay, so it would also, if this paper, or yeah, this piece of paper here is kind of draped, this surface would be in shadow. And there would be a tiny little bit of a shadow in here as well, because that fabric fold or that paper fold is curved. So you're going to also have a little bit of shadow in that area. Okay? So looking at the tops of those toilet paper rolls too, when you have something sitting on top of one another, you're going to have a shadow befall whatever's sitting underneath it. Okay, so let's go on to his hand. He's going to have shadow kind of down that one side of his mitt, and his thumb might even be fully in shadow because his hand is creating a shadow. Okay, so let's go on to the hood. The hood is a cylinder, just like the toilet paper would be. So he too would also have a shadow that would fall on that side of the hood, right? Okay. I'll come back to his body in a second. Again, here is another cylindrical shaped object. You are going to have shadow that falls down the back side of that cylindrical object. This top would also, because it's a cylinder, also would have a shadow that would fall down the side. Same with the tubing on there. Let's go back to his arm, let's say. The sun is coming like this. He's going to have a lot of shadow that's underneath that arm. The sun is actually going to sit and hit underneath his armpit in this manner, but not on this side of his suit. So his suit might also very much be in shadow over here because of the location of that sun. He's also going to have some shadow down this pant leg and this side of his shoe. He might even have a little bit of shadow cast from his arm to the body of his suit. Okay, I hope this all kind of makes sense. And this is what you would do with your image to map out where all of your shadows would be. Okay, so there'd be a little bit of a shadow on the back of the pump. Now you might also have a tiny little shadow underneath the fabric here, and possibly even under his hood. He might have a tiny little cast shadow right here on his visor, because I would assume this is a 3D dimensional thing, and that his visor is kind of set in behind. So this edge would cast a shadow onto his visor. And you might even have a little bit of cast shadows in those circles. Because again, light source is coming this way. So this is three-dimensional, and I assume it's kind of built into his suit. So this would be deeper. So therefore this edge would cast a shadow in this circle. So you can really play up, you can really have fun with these. And then you could go in with your medium shadow, and I'm just going to pick a funny color here that's kind of contrasting against that gray. And you could do your medium shadow, where your shadow kind of fades out. So basically, next to anywhere where you've got that harsh shadow is where you're going to have your lighter shadow, right? Where it fades out. It's not going to be super harsh, that kind of thing. Okay. All right, let's try a different direction. Let's grab another quarantine feller. Okay, so let's assume that our sunlight, or our light source again, is coming right straight from the top, like right overhead. It is 12 noon. And the sun is going to be very bright and very high in the sky. I did forget about cast shadows, and we'll come back to that in a second. So we'll continue on with this one. So the sun is very high in the sky. So you have to think of, okay, so the sun is hitting the top of his glove. You're going to have a very, very tiny shadow because there's only a tiny bit or a tiny lip that's under his mitt that is going to be shadowed. I'm going to assume that this is only going to have just a tiny, tiny little shadow, like very minuscule. Now this one appears to be on top and overhanging the one below. So it's, because that's coming there, it's going to cast a shadow downwards, down the side. And it may be quite long, depending on how much of that roll you think it's overhanging. So this one is sitting kind of back, and I don't think it would really block anything, so I wouldn't put any shadow there. This one is sitting kind of right on top, so I would assume that it's going to cast a shadow on the top of that roll. So that's where that shadow would be. Let's look over here. This is pretty much going to be in light. There might be a tiny little shadow kind of down that fold because it's a little bit tighter and closer into that roll shape. This here, this piece of paper that's overlapping, is going to cast a tiny little tight little shadow underneath of it, like super, super small. Again, working down. This one is sitting almost on top, so I would put a shadow underneath of it because that sun is going to block the top of that next toilet paper roll. This one, even though there's a little bit more of the roll exposed, I would put a very, very tiny shadow underneath that. Still showing a lot of that. This would all be very, very bright, and you might do a very light shadow. Tiny, tiny shadow down in the corners. Now, this might be shielded, so I would probably put a shadow in there. I would keep it fairly tight, though, and I would think there would be just a little bit of a shadow cast by this folded piece that's come out. So again, very, very tight shadow there. Again, hi, Annette. Welcome from England. So let's look at his arm. The sun is coming in this direction directly from up above. He is going to have a shadow under his arm, for sure. And his arm is kind of in front of his body. So because the sun is using his arm to block that light, he's also going to have a shadow underneath of that arm because that arm is casting a shadow down his body. And again, this is a fold, so I assume that there would be a little bit of a shadow underneath his clothing because it's blocking that light. Again, down his pant leg on the inside, and maybe even in some of the creases, he might have a little bit of a shadow there because his body is blocking the light. Might have a little bit of a shadow underneath the end of his pant legs because his pant legs are blooming out and causing a shadow on his shoes. I might even put a shadow underneath his helmet because I think a lot of times their hazmat suits, their helmets kind of protrude out and away from their body, so it would also cast a shadow on his outfit. You might even have just a tiny bit of shadow showing some of those folds in his clothing because the light is not being hit. So let's go to his helmet. If the light is coming from the top, you would probably have a tiny little cast shadow on his visor because it's three-dimensional. It's pushed to the back. Same with these vents. Might have a tiny little cast shadow. You kind of have to play the game of what sticks out the farthest and how far do you think it's sticking out game. And that's kind of how you map out your different shadows. Let's go to the lotion bottle or the sanitizer bottle. If your sun is coming directly down, there's not going to be a lot of shadow. You might have a tiny, tiny little bit there. You would definitely have a cast shadow underneath his glove because it protrudes out over top of that lotion bottle. You're going to have a cast shadow underneath that nozzle. And you probably have a little bit of cast shadow on his mitt too because his thumb may be covering up that gap, so causing a shadow down there. Hi, Cameron. So with the sun being very high in the sky, you have very little shadow. And going back to what I said before, cast shadow. So if you might only have a tiny, tiny little bit at the bottom because your sun is so high in the sky, you want to ground your image like such, but that cast shadow, and I'll go up to the upper one and we'll talk just a bit about where that would be, but there would be very little shadow underneath your object because your light is coming straight down. So going back up here, where our light source is coming in from this direction, and if you look at it in the respect of the sun versus, let's say the sun was coming in this direction. If the sun was coming in this direction, your shadows would be very long compared to here. So here, your sun is coming in. You're going to have cast shadows in the shape of your object, right? So his legs would cast a shadow. And so with that tall group of toilet paper, that would also cast quite a shadow. Like such. So that's something to remember when you're doing scenes too, is don't forget that cast shadow, whatever your object, your full object is, not only what kind of shadows occur on your individual items. So let's pick another direction here. So let's go sun from, let's say, we'll come straight this direction. Maybe it's, maybe got caught in the headlights of a car at dark. So it's very, very dark out. So your shadows will be very, very stark and very, very, linear and tight. So if this was a headlight, and I'm just going to put headlight, so we remember, and it's coming directly, it means you're going to have really, really stark shadows. You're not going to have a lot of midtones or light areas in your shadows. It's going to be black or very, very, very dark. So if your light source is coming this way, your shadow is behind. So this cylindrical shape is casting that shadow on, it's on the back. Same with the cap. It would all be back here. Tubes would be at the back. This one at the back. You would have probably a shadow right pretty much for half of that image because it's tucked behind that blob on the top. For his glove, you would have very stark shadow on the backside. Anything behind that physical bump there would be in shadow. And probably the back of his thumb. So looking at his body, again, let's start with his helmet. That, depending on how far you think this kind of sticks out, would be kind of where you would put your shadow. So I'm kind of thinking it's quite round, so the back of that would have a very, very stark shadow. This would have a tiny little shadow and a tiny little shadow. You may not even go there. This would have a tiny little shadow because, again, like I've said before, I would think that the visor would be slightly inset. So I'd put a tiny little shadow in there. So again, looking this way, he's got a physical arm sticking out here. So this actually might be in shadow as well because his arm is blocking his body. So this might be completely in shadow from his arm. I know it's hard to explain, but his arm is creating a shadow across the rest of his body. And he might have a very dark shadow on the rest of his body. This would be in shadow. So again, you have to think about cylinders in this case with the body. So your leg would be a cylinder, so this would be very, very dark under here. This would be dark. This would catch light because the light's coming this way. So this surface would be bright. Okay, but you might make a little bit of the, sorry buddy, crotch. You might have a little bit of shadow there. And you might have a little bit of shadow underneath that fold or that bulk in his suit. And again, down thinking of his leg as a cylinder, you would have quite a shadow there too, because the light from that car is coming here. This might be entirely lit too, because there's nothing really blocking it, but it might have a tiny little bit of a shadow on this side. Okay, because that light is hitting the body of his arm. Okay, I would imagine he might have a little bit of a shadow here, but he would definitely have a shadow on the back. He might have a little tiny bit behind his thumb. And again, good old cylinders. I'm going to assume almost half of that toilet paper is going to be in shadow. And assuming that this is coming out from behind, this would almost all be in shadow. It might catch a little bit of light. It might not. That's kind of a preference. Okay. Again, that light I'm assuming is going to hit that toilet paper roll like such. And again, this may hide some of your things that are behind. You kind of have to make the call. I'm going to make the call that this bottle is sitting out and there's a gap between him and the bottle, so the light is sneaking in through between from those headlights, and it's going to touch those toilet paper rolls. So tell yourself a story. Tell yourself why it makes sense to you that the shadow is there and not there. Okay? And don't forget those top parts of those toilet paper rolls. I'm going to say that the light is going to hit a little bit of this. Let's put it a little bit in shadow. This is going to cast a shadow for sure. I'm going to say that toilet paper on the top there is going to have a little bit of shadow on its edge, but it's also going to cast a shadow right across the top because it's blocking light across the top. And again, this is a cylinder. And this side of the toilet paper is completely in the dark. And this is going to block anything behind. So again, tell yourself that story. I can see light. The light's coming between the bottle and the man. Okay. So again, you're going to pick that side. Now, here. So I'm going to assume that almost all of that is in shadow, but it's going to catch a tiny bit of light at the top there. And I'm going to say that this is completely blocking this particular one. So we're going to put a tiny, tiny little bit of light bouncing there. And the rest of this puppy is in shadow because this is the back side where your light is coming from this way. This would be in shadow, or at least I would assume it's in shadow. And this would be like a moderate shadow in here. Now, cast shadows for this way, because your headlight is doing this, they're going to be stark and fairly long, like very long. They may even see how the bottle is going to cast a shadow this way. His leg is going to cast that first shadow. And then the rest of his body is going to cast a shadow over here. So if you extend it from your image, you're going to go way out. And it's going to be fairly black. So there's a fair tower. And there's also his body to account for. So you might have quite a shadow coming out from this side. So I hope that makes sense. So you have to think, I mean, you can have a light source anywhere. You can have 57 light sources and have no shadows. If that's the story you want to tell, go for it. But if you tell yourself a story, sometimes it makes it easier to do those shadows, to map them out. And this is why you would go ahead and do this for your image, is because you're telling that story using that light source. So let's do one more. Let's do an upper coming from this direction, because of course we can have artificial lights, right? Maybe it's a campfire that's lighting the scene, or somebody with a flashlight who's holding it low to the ground. Would you always add your shadows before coloring your image or add in later? That depends, Annette. So for instance, if you wanted a stark shadow, you might actually map in all your shadows with, let's say, a BV color, which quite often you might use for shadows. So this is BV 23. So it's a very purpley gray tone. So yes, you might actually go in and map shadows, especially if they were really stark ones, like the headlight one. And then sometimes you might use your colors to add your shadows. So for instance, if this cylinder is pink, okay, here, I'll grab another one. We'll come back to that one for light source. So if your lotion bottle, let's see if I can pull this into center here. If your lotion bottle was pink, so you're going to have anywhere from 3 to 5 possibly different colors. So if this is your true color, this is the color of your actual object. This is R22. So what you might want to do is for a tricolor blend, so you're going to find something darker than R22 and something that's lighter. So I'm going to go to make this really obvious here. So lighter might be R20, 20. And let's go fairly obvious here. This would be an R27. And you can go even farther. Like you can have an even lighter tone and an even darker tone for shadows. Actually, let's do that. So I want a really, really dark shadow for my original color, which is my R22. This is my R39. And let's see. This may not work. And then I'll go even lighter. This is my R00. So there's my color palette. This is my true color of my object. And this is my highlight. And this is my darker or my shadow. So again, let's go back to, give me a second, I'll put my cap back on. Okay, so this is in shadow. This is in, we're going to say our light source is coming in from the left. So this is my shadow color. So I'm going to start off by adding my deepest, darkest shadow color. So this is, so instead of mapping it out as a gray or a purple or something like that, this is how you would do it with color. So there's your R39 going down. Then you come in with your next color, which is your R27. And you're going to go slightly over top of your darker color. You can come back and blend. And then you're going to add in your true color, which is your R22. So this is the color of your actual object. So you're going to go over to top that to blend. And you're going to pull your true color across. I mean, there's usually, not always, but usually this is the color that you use the most of. And of course, I'm not on any specialty paper. This is literally copy paper from my printer. So the blend is not going to be true to having those nice papers. So going to your lighter color, your R20, because remember your light source is coming this way. So this is going to show up as a lighter surface because that light is bouncing off and brightening and lightening your true color. Okay. So, and this is your light or your highlight. You're literally just going to blend. Now, if you have to go back and blend, that's completely fine. And again, like I said, this is not a paper to show you this on. But see how the color of your object is this glorious pink, this R22, but your shadow is quite deep and dark. So that's how you would shadow with color without actually adding a gray. You can absolutely map everything out in your gray or your purple or whatever, and that's absolutely fine. So it's however you're going to color, that's how you're going to map your shadows. By doing this trick or this trick, it's just telling your brain ahead of time that, oh yeah, my light source is coming from the top. His arm is going to cast the shadow underneath. So when I go to color his arm, if you're coloring his arm in the reds again, you know that your darkest color or your shadow color is going to go down first. And where is it going to go? Oh yeah, it's going to go there. Does that kind of make sense? So we'd start by applying your shadow color, and then you're going to build back out. Oops, that was my R27. But so I should have gone in with my, sorry, my R39 here. Because my map is telling me that's where the shadows are going to be. So I go in over top of my R39 with my R27 and just extend that shadow out. And then I would go in with my natural or my original color, my mid-tone. So it's going to be a little bit lighter. Can work on those folds too. And then actually there will probably be more of this color up here, and the highlight would be very high. So my secondary color would be up here. This is my R20. And then see how the highlight is still there? I come in with my highlight color. So just by practicing this or stamping this out before you go and color and start your image, it's just telling you, oh yeah, my light source is from the top. I need to remember to put my shadows here, 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 and here. That's all. So it's just helping your brain when it comes to doing that final image. So let's go back to our little flashlight image here. So I'm just going to put flashlight so that you know it's an artificial light source. So again, it's a totally different angle, and you have to think about all of those shapes in a different manner. So it's very close to the headlight, right? It's going to be very, very bright in the front. So in this case, you're going to have very little shadow, like very, very little shadow. And again, you have to assume that, I hope it wasn't it. If you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to drop them into the comment box, because that's what I'm here for. That's why I wanted to do this live, is so that you guys can ask questions. So again, this light source is going to be very bright, let's say. Well, let's start by looking at this cylinder. There's really no edges to catch darkness other than this edge may cast a light up onto that cap. So you might have a tiny bit of a shadow here just because of how low that light source is. Again, you might have a tiny bit there, and this would probably be in shadow just because his glove would be blocking the light. Oops, sorry. Now, okay, this cylinder, and I'm going to use my arrow here, is the light is coming right kind of up in between everything, right? This cylinder and this row of cylinders. So this part of his suit may be in shadow because this is casting a shadow onto his body. Okay, but because of where it's coming in, it might be just a little tiny bit of a shadow and not very thick. If your light source was over here, let's say, and it was pointing across this bottle, it might cast a huge shadow on his body right here. So if you're thinking really, really specific, think in that manner. Oh, that bottle is cylindrical. It's in full brightness, but it's sitting in front of that light source. Therefore, it is blocking light to his suit. But since it's kind of coming down in between those two rows, it's only going to cause a little bit of a shadow there. Okay, so this part of his body might be in shadow as well, just because of where that light source is coming. You might have a tiny, tiny, itty bitty shadow underneath the glove, like super tiny. So this light is going to catch a lot of this stuff. There's going to be very, very little shadow. You might have a little bit underneath his leg. You might have a tiny, tiny bit underneath his cuff, like tiny. The These are going to be, it's all going to be very, very bright. He may have a tiny bit underneath his helmet. He may have a tiny, tiny bit on that face mask. A lot of this is going to be very lit. You may have a tiny bit underneath the back. And he might have a tiny, tiny little one underneath his armpit. And then again, light, you have to think, okay, where are my shadows? This is going to have a little tiny bit of a shadow underneath it. Most of this is going to be in highlight. It's going to be very, very bright. So again, that same cylindrical shape it's going to repeat itself almost. Pretty close anyway. These are going to have very little shadow on them because they're very bright. This top of that toilet paper roll would possibly be in shadow because of how low that light is. So they would be dark. And there, same with here. This might be completely dark back here. Now, this one sits out in front. It's going to take its shape and it's going to cast a shadow completely. So it might be the whole thing that's in shadow, but I'm going to give it just a tiny bit of shadow because maybe it's in a spot where it can pick up shadow. So this one is going to be completely covered because this one is covering or blocking the light to that back one. The top, I'm going to say, is in shadow. Again, there's nothing blocking this one, so we're just going to do a tiny little shadow off the back. Again, that top surface is not receiving any light. Anything down that side, again, that's a flat surface. It's going to be dark. Okay. This is going to cast a tiny little shadow. And it's not going to come down to the bottom because if the light's coming up, it's casting a shadow back. So it's not going to come down. Like if this is that flap, the light is going to still transfer under because of the angle it's coming at. So your shadow is going to come down to partial and not all the way down to that corner because the light's going to pass under. Okay, so there. Now you're going to get a little bit of shadow on the top because this is going to be in darkness because it's sitting flat on the top. Okay, so it's going to be dark. This might cast a little shadow. This might be in full and complete catching that light. Okay. The top of his or the front of his mitt is going to be quite bright, but not the back. And he's going to lose pretty much all his thumb, but the end of his thumb may catch light. Okay. There you go. So you got to remember, you have to look at them as different shapes. And you can go back to simplifying your shapes into cubes. Right? So it's a little cube of sugar, and if your light's hitting here, then this is going to be in shadow, and so is this. They might be different tones of shadow. This might be even darker than the top, so you would add a darker color. So let's do that. So your darker shadow would be on the right side. Again, so if it's a cube and your light source is coming from the top, then this surface is flat. It's going to catch light. Again, this might be in shadow and this is going to be in shadow. Now, to differentiate them, you might want to add a darker tone to the one side because it's getting a little less light than the other one. Okay. And silicone or cylindrical objects, so tubes basically. So, and again, these are all tubes, all cylinders. So again, when the light hits certain objects from certain angles, so if this is low and from the left, you're going to have shadows on this side, and your top is going to be very, very dark, but it may have a catch. May catch that edge. Okay? And again, your shadows may have to change in their intensity. And this is where color comes in, right? This is where your tints and your tones. So to get that cylinder to be colored pink, you're going to use your R39 on that very outer edge, because that's where your shadow is going to be the darkest. So yeah. Do you guys have any questions? Is there any specific direction that you would like to see? Anything like that? Do you want to see me color up an image? Because I do have one of our fun little quarantine men printed out. I have to find him. I thought he was right here. Oh, there he is. Do you guys want me to actually color up an image? Now that we've gone over our light source goodies? I'm not sure if I can get to you. 1 second here. Woo! Okay. Okay. So let me know if that's clear. Because again, my computer is showing me something completely different. Do you want me to color in even, let's just color in our lovely little bottle here. Let's do some fun blues. How's that sound? Okay, so we're gonna make this pretty darn obvious here. Okay, so I just picked 5 fabulous blue markers here. I've got and I'll put my caps up as I go. All right. So I'm going to start with our darkest shades. Okay. So this is a BG09. So always rotate your image to where it's comfortable for you to color, because when you are making specific movements with your marker, always put it in a comfortable spot for your hand, okay? So we're going to make this bottle this bluey green. So let's assume that our light source is, let's see, maybe coming from here. Let's put in a little pencil mark so it can be erased. If I can find my pencil, I think my son stole it. Oh, nope, there's one. Okay. And you can do this on your very own drawings. Just put a light arrow, just as a quick reminder as to which direction your light source is coming. So if this is the case, then we're going to have quite a bit of shadow on the base. Okay. All right. So come in and start kind of mapping out your deepest, darkest parts. Okay, so there's our deepest, darkest. And again, you do not need a lot of your dark color. You can always go in and add. So if you start off with a little, you can always go and add. So BG07. So you're going to go in and touch that. This would be your second darkest. And just go my shadow. And this would be closer to my true color, my mid-tone. So this is BG05. So I'm going to pull quite a bit of this color out. You're wanting to go over top of that second darkest. To blend everything together, you can go even over the darkest tone. Okay, then we're going to go to our second lightest, which in this case is going to be a BG02. I don't know about you, but I always put my caps up upside down. And I'm going to pull a lot of this color right across my bottle. Oh, and let me tell you something. I'm going to have to go back here and I'll show you why. Okay, so, and this is why you have to, this is a good reason why you might want to map your images out before you start. This hand, because the sun is coming from here, or the light source, it's going to cast a good old shadow. So I have pulled out my BG09, which is my darkest. And there is a little shadow underneath that sucker. BG07. There we go. And I'm going to assume that this is a very, very stark shadow. So I'm going to leave it like that. This is my lightest color, BG01. This has a lot of blender solution in it, so just be careful when you go over your other colors because it will push. Okay, now I don't like how there's quite a line there, so I'm going to go back to my mid-tone, which is the color that's like right here, my BG 02. And I'm just going to go in and see if I can work on that. I'm just going to go back and forth and just see if I can blend that out just a bit, just so it's not so stark. And I'm going to do the same with that shadow, just a little tiny bit. Okay, so there. So instead of mapping out with gray or adding gray for your shadows, you use the color to indicate shadow. So when a blue object becomes shadowed, it's just going to deepen in color. So that's how you would color your shadow, if that makes sense. Okay. So, if you don't have any more questions, I'm going to call it a day. Thank you so much for joining me. If you are on my replay, please don't hesitate to put a comment below. I will be happy to answer your questions. And I hope you guys go and check out all of the new and amazing release from Sweet Sentiment. There are some super awesome and super funny stamps that Jamie has released. And take an opportunity to check that out. I'll put a link to the store in the section below. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you come visit again. Happy coloring!